and those from the present who have created this opportunity, which can also serve as an opening where we can express ourselves freely. An opportunity we didn't always have in the past, and certain influences directed us to act in ways that were not always the most sensitive, the most ethical, even devotional. And that has left scars on some devotees' hearts, which is very painful to Krishna himself. It takes a greater God to walk with us through our pain than one who would merely deliver us from it. Srila Prabhupada came to America with a very heavy mandate weighing on his heart to spread Krishna consciousness through the Western world, starting at the age of 70, arriving from the holy groves of Ramanreti, arriving in Bowery, which I recently learned was considered the most degraded place even in New York. I always thought New York was the most degraded place in the world. I found out that the Bowery is the most degraded place in New York. And from Ramanreti, the playground of Krishna and Balaram, the Braj Bhumi, Srila Prabhupada came to the Bowery to display a depth of compassion and concern for the living entities languishing miserably in this world, such as never been demonstrated before. Knowing that he had very little time to inaugurate a worldwide renaissance of devotion, he accepted anyone who came to him and engaged them. However unqualified they may have been, however immature or insensitive, it was a desperate situation. And Srila Prabhupada was very clear that utilizing such an uncultured team of disciples and followers to establish the most refined, purely devotional culture in the most degraded regions of the earth would surely result in mistakes, misgivings, injuries. But he encouraged us not to build a monument to our pain, but to rejoice on the altar of praise. Because the consequences for our shortcomings are short-lived. We may carry the scars through life, but that's also short-lived. The benefits of what Srila Prabhupada did and what we all achieved in serving him, those benefits are eternal. Srila Prabhupada began his movement in New York and San Francisco. But there's a much less known side of Srila Prabhupada. We know that he was a follower of Gandhi, great aspiration to revive village life based on the cow and dependence on the earth. And that aspect of Gandhi's mission was perfectly consistent with the Gaudiya Vaishnava mission. Wasn't emphasized by previous acharyas because at those times most of the people were living in the villages, dependent on the cow and agriculture. But seeing the conditions in which living entities were struggling to survive in New York and elsewhere in America, when Srila Prabhupada heard of the possibility of acquiring some land in West Virginia, he immediately mentally moved in and revealed his vision before even visiting here of a simple life based on high thinking, dependent on the cow and Mother Earth. That's the practical aspect. The spiritual side of that vision, he gave in his very first instructions in 1968. Develop a replica of Vrindaban. You have so many new duplicates of their European counterparts. Why not the new Vrindaban? And why not Govardhan Hill, Radhakund, Shamakund, and replicas of the 7 temples of the Goswamis? He gave us that vision and that mission. And how Krishna used us. As we began to build the first of the Vrindavan temples, we were all overcome with the sentiment that this is not proper. We don't have a suitable residence for Srila Prabhupada here. And then the focus went into building a temple. Now in those days, amongst the 25 residents here, it was hard to find even a handful who were confident enough as to even tie their shoes. But they were commissioned to build a palace. But the real trick came in the mid to late 70s when we were on a consistent marathon to finish the palace for Srila Prabhupada's residence. But the news arriving from India made it very clear that he was going to leave this world before that was accomplished. We continued with determination and enthusiasm, not even really understanding how Krishna was using us. And what we were experiencing at this time was a bond, a brotherhood, a family, a fellowship, in which there was a deep camaraderie, comparable but superior to what you even find in veterans of wars that have such commitment to one another that transcends even the barriers of death. And then that fateful news arrived in Kartik, 1977. Srila Prabhupada has gone home. He had already assured us that I'm living in a temple, in a palace now, and will continue to do so. And he also told us that if you succeed in creating a replica of Vrindavan, I won't have to go back to India even. So we're processing this all as we're trying to maintain enthusiasm to finish Srila Prabhupada's residence, now a palace of gold. And it was really the night of his departure when we understood a little of how Krishna was tricking us and using us. Because in the darkness of separation from Guru, who had given us our lives, our everything, not knowing where to turn, our only shelter was Srila Prabhupada's books and the kirtan, in which we all united that night at the palace, unfinished as it was. And toward the morning, early morning hours, 3 o'clock, when the pujaris had to start leaving to tend to their deity services in the various temples, from the current of Virpalamba, the anguish of separation from Guru, which was so deep and so intense that the devotees were literally holding one another up. Suddenly, inexplicably, the whole current shifted and came from the direction of Sambhog, union. Union with Srila Prabhupada in a more tangible, deep way than any of us, even those who had been with Srila Prabhupada for a long time, had ever felt before. And we began to understand. We were used to build Srila Prabhupada's first samadhi, his Smriti Samadhi, where he continues to reside in this world, in, that's what samadhi means, total absorption in Krishna. In his samadhi here, while serving Radha and Krishna and Vrindaban, offering us an opportunity to develop or continue a relationship with him until we rejoin him in what he said we would find as ISKCON in the spiritual sky. We've heard a few times already today mention of a very substantial event in Vrindaban history. And the bittersweet nature of the occasion makes it somewhat conspicuous by its absence in the annals of Vrindaban history. Some of us have been wondering why one of our preachers kept using this analogy that Maya has a shotgun aimed at your head. Then one day, we had a shotgun aimed at our heads. And you hear different perspectives from different devotees for various reasons. That motorcycle gang was not intimidated by the fact that Bidhan Chandra looked like he was already gone as he lay in a pool of blood. And they were not at all happy, or at least one of them was not happy, that one of the devotees in the struggle had pulled the barrel off his gun. And he felt humiliated. He's got half a gun, while his entourage has machine gun, or at least it looked like machine guns and other weapons. And he knew who did it. And he kept telling that devotee, "Where is the barrel to my gun?" Well, the fact is, when the blast went off, the devotees, knocked over by shell shock. Somebody grabbed the barrel of his gun to hide behind the curtain to clobber him when he came through the door. When he saw how many there were, he ran away with the barrel to the gun, which so much humiliated and infuriated that one member of the motorcycle gang. He kept saying, "Don't entertain any thoughts that you're going to survive this incident. You're all going to die, but we're going to make it slow." And they weren't intimidated by the thoughts of police action or any such thing. And as they took some of our members to the top of the hill, giving them shovels to dig their own graves, these men were, you could call it like intoxicated with the blood and the injury that they had just inflicted on the Vaishnavas. And they were fearless on the outer level. And then, when two personalities who had become very intimate with an entourage of servants, Shri Shri Radha Vrindaban Chandra, we emphasized back in those days, we had to, because some of us were often had to face a gun put to their heads. If you were moving farm equipment up and down this road with horses or oxen or mules, it was the Wild West back then. And it was a common occasion you'd have a gun put to your head. So we preached a lot to encourage and inspire one another that Krishna will protect us. And we recited the stories from the ancient histories of Prahlad Maharaj and Dhruva Maharaj and others. How Sri Sri Radha Vrindaban Chandra protected us was unprecedented in Vaishnava history. And when the deities fell, the members of the motorcycle gang who were on their way up the hill suddenly became afflicted with fear. And they turned around and came back. The others could see the fear in their hearts, and they all just left. And then we experienced an anguish which, even in the conversation between Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Rai, is cited as the most extreme type of pain, separation from the Lord and his devotees. Because Sri Sri Radha Vrindaban Chandra had to go to the seclusion. We didn't know if they could be repaired. We didn't know if they could be worshipped if they were repaired. And every day when the curtain opened, and there was nothing but a vacancy on the center altar, a metaphor for what felt within our hearts. All we could cling to was Srila Prabhupada's instructions and the precious jewel of the Brijavasi spirit, our association, our family, our community. And then word came that Srila Prabhupada said, if you can repair the deities, they can continue to be worshipped. At the same time, we received news that Bhagavatananda Prabhu was succeeding in piecing them back together. Some years later, duplicate deities were fashioned, which I was told would be for the sake of festivals. They could go out on their chariot in a swan boat. I later found out it was to replace the original deities because they were damaged. And then the loving tensions within this community reached what I would call unprecedented heights. Until we came to realize that those breaks, which are like scars on the deity's pure and beautiful forms, are really embellishments of their beauty and how they protected their devotees in loving reciprocation to the Vaishnavas who developed this community on the principle of keeping Radha Vrindaban Chandra in the center and following Srila Prabhupada's instructions as our life and soul. For simple farmers and cowherd folks, members of the plow department, it was difficult to get close to Srila Prabhupada in the later years. That obstacle was overcome by Srila Prabhupada's own spontaneous nature when he made an unscheduled appearance in the agricultural field one day without his high entourage. He just walked right into the agricultural field where there was no devotees present other than the cowherd folks and the plow department, all of whom, seeing this golden opportunity, formed a line behind Srila Prabhupada as he chanted on his beads, walking into the hay meadow, apparently lost in his own thoughts, until he stopped, turned around and looked behind him, and saw this trail of Brijabasis, the men in their work clothes and big boots, and the Matatis with their saris, decorated with patterns made from contact with cow dung. They were the cowherd folks. Srila Prabhupada looked at what you might call a motley group, and his countenance just beamed with the most blissful smile. And he said, "These devotees are not opulent, but they are jolly." And when he said jolly, he beamed all the more. Then he turned, continued walking into the middle of the hay meadow. And this is not recorded. Nobody thought to have a recorder available because this was not scheduled. In the very middle of the hay meadow, he stopped again. Now, a number of the devotees in that group had something on their minds and weighing heavily on their hearts about the way we had been influenced, sometimes even ordered, to do things that we thought were insensitive, unethical, and non-devotional by a certain authority figure. But we could never express that to Srila Prabhupada because we could never get anywhere near him. And now we had the opportunity. But nobody had to say anything. Because as you know, in Srila Prabhupada's presence, it's intimidating because he can see your heart with all the anarthas and unwanted things. He also sees devotion, but he also sees beyond our present circumstances into our potential, and he encourages that. Before anybody had to say anything, he answered their questions. Just cooperate with one another to build this new Vrindaban community. Now, a few seconds ago, he had been very jolly mood. Now he turned very grave. It was a blissful gravity, but it was grave. And he answered another thing, another matter. Because we all had this sentiment, which is partially proper and partially arrogant, that we're the most fortunate. We live in Vrindaban. That has some truth, but in our immature stage, it has some arrogance as well. And Srila Prabhupada affirmed, he said, he didn't only affirm our good fortune. He said, first, you don't even know how fortunate you are. You have the land, the cows, each other, and Sri Sri Radhavindra Chandra. And then he repeated, which is a strategy for emphasis, you don't even know how fortunate you are. The Vrijabhasi spirit, which is the treasure we claim as the essence of our good fortune, is a quality of relationships. not just amongst humans. Srila Prabhupada wanted a community to demonstrate harmony between the humans, the animals, the land, the earth, nature. And that kind of harmony can only be found when Krishna is truly in the center of our thoughts, in our hearts, and our deeds. And the Brijavasi spirit is a consciousness of always turning to Krishna. In times of joyous celebration, in times of deep anguish, times of joy and times of tears, and in actually turning to Krishna, what difference does it make? If there is joyous laughter, deep anguish, you're on the verge of death, what difference does it make? Because the Brijavasi spirit is eternal. He reasons ill who says that Vaishnavas die. They live forever in sound. The Vaishnavas die to live, which means they practice cultivating a humble service attitude, which is the death of false ego, which we rejoice. And their life is for spreading the holy name around. We sometimes get so caught up in our own individual sufferings that we forget what was it that drove Srila Prabhupada to use us with all the complications and problems that created for him, which is temporary by nature, to benefit eternally the suffering world. He made that greatest sacrifice like no one in history has ever done. And he awarded us all the honor of being his servants, followers, disciples, along with a lifetime or more that it takes to actually grow into the character that designation would warrant. There has been tremendous trials and struggles and adversities in establishing this community. But by Srila Prabhupada's example, we were inspired that adversity is an opportunity to practice perseverance, tolerance. And from perseverance comes character. And from character comes hope. And that it is that hope that has kept this community not only alive, but vibrant in all kinds of circumstances. And today, as we all come together, the old pioneers joining with the present servants and the future prospects, let us not build monuments to the pain that we've endured, but praise, altars to praise for the opportunity of being part